is the text of the hymn, All Things Bright and Beautiful. It's my belief not only is this the worst hymn in the English language, but it's also one of the shittest things ever written by anyone in any language ever. I'm going to explain why that is now, right? This is the chorus up here, which you sing once at the start of the hymn, and then a further 7 times during it. And it's my belief you don't need to do that. I think you can get the idea of what the hymn's about just from reading that through once, I think, right? So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to read it through once. I want you to see if you can understand what the hymn's saying. Look out for key words, all right? Here's how it goes. All things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, the Lord God made them all. The key word is all there. All those things have been made by God. That's what it's saying. It's easy to understand. You'd have to be stupid not to read that through once and it is totally crystal clear. He made them all. So given how clear that is, why is it necessary for the hymn writer to go on and give a further 19 specific examples of some of the individual things God's made, in case when you read that through, he made them all, you didn't understand what it meant? You thought it meant he's made them all, but not these ones here. They're special, they have to be individually accounted for.
I don't imagine that when Cecil Frances Alexander sat down to write All Things Bright and Beautiful, that she could have envisaged that some 150 years later, a smart-ass comic would be making fun of her beautiful hymn. When I was a child and used to go to church, this was my very most favourite hymn. What, of course, I didn't know then was that it was a depiction of a world where everything had been created to fit in a niche. A world where it was not only the role of religion to remind people of God's role in creation, but it was also the duty of science to reveal the self-same thing, where the best scientists in Britain felt that it was their duty to reveal the nature of God's creation. And it is a world that Darwin's new theory would make redundant, but not before there was a battle. Oxford, 1860, and the newly built Oxford Museum is to host the British Association for the Advancement of Science, a meeting that was held annually. It seemed fitting that the meeting would be held in this new magnificent Gothic building. Of course, with the recent publication of Origin, there was going to be no way that evolution, that transmutation, would avoid being discussed. One of the sessions was put aside for this very purpose. The debate itself took place in the main hallway. Obviously, the cabinets that we see now were not down there. And it has to be said that the people that had put this museum together wanted the architecture and the exhibits to demonstrate the unity of God and nature. The debate itself took place principally between the Bishop of Oxford, Soapy Sam Wilberforce, and T.H. Huxley, who was one of Darwin's principal supporters. There have been many dramatisations of this debate. I choose one here.
Any contribution to our natural history from the pen of Mr. Charles Darwin is certain to command attention. His latest publication, The Origin of Species, is manifestly regarded by him as the opus upon which his future fame is to rest. Mr. Darwin claims that every living thing, every fish, plant, fungus, fly, elephant, man, turnip are all equally the lineal descendants of the same common ancestor. Such a notion is absolutely incompatible with the Word of God. Man was made in the image of God and redeemed by the eternal Son. Natural selection is an ingenious theory for denying the working and therefore the existence of the Creator. In fact, the human brain differs markedly from that of all other mammals.
Unfortunately, my Lord Bishop, you have been misinformed. If we are unprejudiced judges, we have to admit that there is as little interval as animals between the gorilla and the man as there is between the gorilla and the baboon. It is speech alone and not some spiritual gift that makes man a reasonable being. That is the source of our unlimited intellectual progress, but that does not disguise the fact that to the very root and foundation of his nature, man is one with the rest of the organic world. No one who has ever dissected the brain of an ape agrees with Professor Owen. His findings are wrong. I can only assume that Professor Owen's brain must have shrunk in the pickling jar.
I meant, of course, the chimpanzee's brains he had examined.
Oh, Lord.
It was then that God delivered Wilberforce into my hands.
I wonder, Mr. Huxley, is it through your grandfather or your grandmother that you claim descent from an ape?
I stood up, very quiet, very grave, and said my say with perfect good temper.
If the question is put to me, would I rather have a miserable ape for a grandfather, or a man, highly intelligent, possessed of great means of influence, and yet who employed these faculties and that influence for the mere purpose of introducing ridicule into a grave scientific discussion? I unhesitatingly affirm my preference for the ape.
You didn't. I said that, or something very like that.
How dare you attack a live bishop in public? Have you no respect for the purple waistcoat?
Lady Brewster fainted, had to be carried from the room. And then Admiral Fitzroy got to his feet.
Fitzroy?
Believe in this! Believe in God, not man!
Oh, my.
Of course, like all such accounts, there's a lot of mythology in the story of the Great Debate. Chances are that nobody could hear very much. It was a large hall, they didn't have any means of amplification. There was claim and counterclaim about who had won the day. Hooker, when he wrote to Darwin, even maintained that it was his intervention from the floor that had led to the debate being won for the Darwinians. He said in the letter, he had not one word to say in reply, that's Wilberforce, and the meeting dissolved forthwith, leaving you the master of the field after 4 hours of battle. I've been congratulated and thanked by the blackest coats and the whitest socks in Oxford. Blackest coats and whitest socks is of course referring to the dons, who to a man were the reverends who taught science in this hallowed institution. There is no doubt, however, that in the years that followed, the Paleite universe started slipping away and Darwinism increasingly became accommodated into the Church of England's worldview. But before we explore how this occurred, it is important that we explore the Paleolithic universe in a bit more detail. So let's take it back to the Beagle. After several years of traipsing up and down the east and west coasts of South America, the Beagle was now on its way back home, but it was going the long way, around the Pacific, the Southern Ocean, and then back up through the Atlantic. On the 9th of February 1835, they're in Valdivia in Chile. It's at this point that they sail onwards to the Galapagos Islands, where they arrive on the 15th of September 1835, and after a few productive weeks they sail on across the Pacific to the Bay of Islands in New Zealand. They arrive there on the 21st of December and shortly leave once again for Australia. The Beagle gets to Sydney in January 1836. It's hot and dirty. Darwin is very unimpressed with the nature of convict society. However, he decides to take himself off into the bush and goes up into the Blue Mountains and crosses the Blue Mountains, all the while observing the wildlife that he can find there. The ardent naturalist that he's become means that he's observing the strange wildlife, so very different to that which can be found in Europe. Clearly the marsupials claim his attention, mammals, but with such a different reproductive system to the species that he's been observing in other parts of the world. And he gets to musing upon these differences. I'd been lying on a sunny bank and was reflecting on the strange character of the animals of this country as compared to the rest of the world. An unbeliever, he crosses out disbeliever in his diary, in everything beyond his own reason, might exclaim, surely two distinct creators must have been at work. Their object, however, has been the same, and certainly the end. In each case, the end is complete. So here he is, musing upon the fact that the Australian wildlife would challenge the view that there was a creator who had designed the universe in all of its details. He went on, while thus thinking, I observed the conical pitfall of a lion ant. A fly fell in and immediately disappeared. Then came a large but unwary ant, his struggles to escape being very violent. The little jets of sand described by Kirby were promptly directed against him. Without doubt, this predaceous larva belongs to the same genus, but to a different species from the European one. Now, he continues, what would the disbeliever say to this? Would any two workmen ever hit on so beautiful, so simple, and yet so artificial a contrivance? It cannot be thought so. The one hand has surely worked throughout the universe. Now, this was really quite an extraordinary thing to hear from Darwin. We barely ever find these kind of expressions in his work, and yet here was a man who was steeped in the dominant way of thinking about science. For Darwin was very much a product of the Paleolithic universe. The Reverend William Paley is best known as the author of Natural Theology or Evidences of the Existence and Attributes of the Deity. In this work, Natural Theology, which gave a name to the whole Paleolithic field, he explored the way that a scientist looking at nature could infer from its structure design. The book, published in 1802, commences with the famous watchmaker analogy. In crossing a heath, suppose I pitched my foot against a stone and were asked how the stone came to be there. I might possibly answer that for anything I knew to the contrary, it had lain there forever. Nor would it perhaps be very easy to show the absurdity of this answer. But suppose I had found a watch upon the ground, and it should be inquired how the watch happened to be in that place. I should hardly think of the answer which I before given, that for anything I knew, the watch might have always been there. Yet why should not this answer serve for the watch as well for the stone? Why is it not as admissible in the second case as in the first? For this reason, and for no other, namely, that when we come to inspect the watch, we perceive what we could not discover in the stone, that its several parts are framed and put together for a purpose. But, Paley goes on to argue, if we're good scientists and examine nature with a forensic eye, we will be able to discern the same level of detail, the same level of design as we do in a watch. And just as we can infer the existence of a watchmaker from the watch, from a flower or a bird, we can infer the beauty of the design of the universe. A design can only be there because there is a designer in the supreme being, the supreme creator. It would be very hard to underestimate the impact that Paleite thinking, that natural theology had upon the scientific world of Britain, the world that Darwin was to grow up in. Over the course of the next 20 or 30 years, we see scientist after scientist throwing their weight behind the natural theology programme. When the 9th Earl of Bridgewater died in 1829, he decided to leave a bequest. The bequest was to be dedicated towards works of natural theology produced by some of the greatest scientific names of the day. It would cover a number of distinct areas: geology, astronomy, anatomy, to name but a few. And each of these works would examine in minute detail their chosen area and evince design from the detail. A typical version of this can be found in the work of the Reverend William Buckland, Geology and Mineralogy with reference to natural philosophy. Here he looked at the ancient age of the earth, because while these guys definitely believe in a God the Creator, they also believe in the ancient age of the earth. And this was what was examined in Buckland's work, as we can see from the front page of his treatise. And this is the world that Darwin is educated in. This is the Cambridge scene. This is where individuals like Henslow and Sedgwick teach science in such a way that it is dedicated to evincing design.